S2 Cognition.
S2 Cognitive Test.
What is the S2 Cognitive Test? Everyone is now
S2
obsessing
test.
over.
What is the actual test?
If you've been on NFL Twitter over the last couple weeks, you've probably heard something about this S2 cognitive test. It's going around everywhere. We've seen certain scores, we've seen 97th percentile for certain quarterbacks, but nobody knows exactly what it means. We just keep seeing all of these numbers, not necessarily tied to anything. And I wanted to figure out, what exactly is this test? What is it testing for? How does it measure? What does it mean when quarterbacks score a certain score? And how does this affect the way that we are going to view scouting as a whole in the NFL? And if we are going to understand the S2 cognitive test, I think it's important that we first look at the Wonderlic, which is really what came before it. You would always see quarterbacks' Wonderlic scores coming out every year, and people barely knew what that meant at the time, and it's important to understand what the Wonderlic is. Basically, the Wonderlic was a 50-question test where you would have 5 minutes to take it, and it would test you in a variety of mainly school subject type questions. You would be asked to solve math problems, find synonyms for certain words, find patterns in different puzzles and things along those lines, and you would just get a score, that number out of 50. If you saw a blank quarterback scored a 35, that would mean that they got 35 of the questions correct. The thing is, that test wasn't really scoring anything that would translate to a football field, rather just base intelligence, it seems, and quick decision making. On the other hand, the S2 Cognition test is actually designed to test 9 individual things that football players may use on a field, different parts of their mind and cognitive abilities that usually wouldn't be tested otherwise if they took the Wonderlic. On the official S2 Cognition website, those 9 categories are marked as perception speed, search efficiency, tracking capacity, visual learning, instinctive learning, decision complexity, impulse control, distraction control, and improvisation. On paper, all 9 sound like things that NFL and collegiate athletes, especially football players, would use on a day-to-day basis. And along with that, there are actually articles on the S2 Cognition website showing what they believe those different skills actually correlate to when looked at on a football field. There's actually a wide array of data on this website, but the data we're going to be looking at in particular is what would be marked as significant, which would mean, in an academic journal sense, 95 out of the 100 times that a test occurred, this result would have to have happened to be considered significant or valid. And one of the really interesting pieces of data that actually would constitute as valid is the tie between 2 of S2's metrics, those being tracking capacity and impulse control, with completion percentage. Given their tests, impulse control and tracking capacity combined predict 51.2%. That's over half of a quarterback's given completion percentage. That's pretty impressive. Now, they also used a similar model to try to figure out which of their statistics actually correlates with interception rate, and they found that only one of them would constitute as significant, and that was impulse control, which shows that 24.2% of the variation in interception rate is actually accounted for by that impulse control stat, which is tested for on the cognition exam. As written in their website, talking with front offices and quarterback coaches, most people in the sport consider a CPR, which is career passer rating, of 90 and above to be elite quarterback play. This is what they constituted as their top tier starters in the NFL. They currently have logged 13 NFL quarterback starters in their database who have met that cut point of a 90 career passer rating or higher. Now, they also have 14 quarterbacks who finished below that 90 career passer rating threshold. So what they went out of their way to do was compile all of the scores of those quarterbacks who tested in the S2 Cognition exam to show what their average score would be and what the ranges of their scores would be. So what did the highest quarterback score within a tier, and what did the lowest quarterback score within a tier? And while looking at this chart, you may see that the high scores are pretty similar. Every tier had somebody who finished with a score of 90 or higher, but it's those low numbers and those averages that make this a lot more interesting, because the lowest score on the S2 for a high tier starter was a 74. But if you drop to guys who are at the end of the roster, maybe low tier starters, or guys who were never even signed, that drops to scores of 8, 15, and 1 on the S2 exam. This drops those averages significantly, and while top tier starters had a score of 91 on average, lower tier starters had a score of 51, backup and roster players had a score of 69, and guys who were never signed had a score of 62. That actually maps out to 28.7% of career passer rating actually being able to be predicted by how somebody scores on the S2, which is pretty significant and impressive when you look at the fact that the Wonderlic, which was the test that I mentioned earlier, only accounts for 0.1% of career passer rating. But that does beg the question, if I'm playing devil's advocate, of whether a career passer rating of 90 or more was a high enough bar to set for what is regarded as elite quarterback play. If you look on Pro Football Reference, there are 18 quarterbacks that are actively in the NFL with a career passer rating of 90 or higher. Those are Patrick Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers, Deshaun Watson, Joe Burrow, Russell Wilson, Jimmy Garoppolo, Kirk Cousins, Dak Prescott, Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert, Matt Ryan, Jared Goff, Kyler Murray, Josh Allen, Ryan Tannehill, Derek Carr, Matthew Stafford, and Teddy Bridgewater. And this is where we get a little bit subjective, because there aren't 18 active quarterbacks that are elite. That simply isn't how the position works, but it's hard to argue against the fact that all of these guys have had success at one point or another within their careers and were at one point considered solid starters. And I have to admit, the S2 exam might not be perfect when it comes to comparing to career passer ratings above 90 and finding superstars that way, simply because not all of those quarterbacks are superstars. But if there's as much of a correlation as S2 is claiming to career passer rating, it might make it a little easier to avoid bust draft picks. And I think that brings us to a perfect conclusion on what the S2 test actually is, and that is just another tool in the toolbox when it comes to evaluating quarterbacks and players at other positions in football. If you're going to draft somebody that is going to be the face of your franchise for the next 15 plus years, you want to make sure that you're selecting the right guy, and you have to be able to look at every conceivable metric, that being statistics, film, and now cognition exams like the S2, which just give a little sense of security to general managers that hope that they're drafting the right guy when it comes time to make their pick. Whether or not GMs will use it, we'll soon figure out, but I certainly think it's exciting that we're trending in a new direction when it comes to these type of tests and new ways to evaluate players. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe for more, because more content is coming to WeBall, and we have some very big announcements soon. Make sure to like this, comment what you think of the S2 exam, and like I said, subscribe for more. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.